I parked outside the house I once called home, staring at the lights glowing through the windows. Laughter drifted faintly into the driveway, the same kind that used to make me feel invisible. My hands rested on the steering wheel, steady but cold. The envelope sat beside me, thick with the truth I'd carried for years. Every time I'd tried to let it go, I couldn't. That night wasn't just about my father anymore. It was about me finally facing the woman who built her comfort on my silence. I opened the car door and stepped out. Inside, the air smelled like expensive candles and roast beef, the kind of meal meant to impress guests. My stepmother was in her element, wearing a polished smile that didn't reach her eyes. She noticed me and called out my name like she was greeting a stranger she barely remembered. The family turned to look, a mix of curiosity and forced politeness. I managed a nod, even though I wanted to turn back around. This was my father's memorial dinner, and she'd made it more about herself than him. That was always her way. The dining room looked smaller than I remembered. The big table that once held Sunday breakfasts now felt like a stage for her performances. My half-siblings sat there, laughing too loudly, pretending the tension didn't exist. My seat was at the far end, the one she used to assign me as a teenager. The empty chair at the head of the table made my stomach twist. My father's chair. No one touched it, but she'd placed a framed photo of him there, like an accessory. I couldn't look at it for long. My father used to tell me to keep peace at all costs, but that advice turned into a cage I never escaped. I'd followed it for too long. Tonight I was breaking it. I scanned the faces around me, wondering how many of them knew the truth about what really happened before he died. She began talking about how difficult it had been managing his estate. She called it a heavy responsibility, though everyone knew she'd enjoyed the power. My brother nodded like a loyal assistant. I caught sight of a familiar gold watch on his wrist. My father's watch. My chest tightened. That watch went missing the night before my father's company collapsed. I had searched for it for years. Seeing it again was like being hit by the past. I didn't say anything, but that detail confirmed what I'd always suspected. She had kept everything that wasn't hers. I felt her eyes on me as she talked, waiting for me to react. That was her favorite game, testing how far she could push me before I broke. She mentioned how some people never learned to appreciate what they were given, glancing my way as she took a sip of wine. I didn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I focused on the hum of conversation around the table. I realized how empty it all sounded, like background noise to a play that was losing its audience. Her words had no power anymore. Not tonight. As dessert was served, she leaned back in her chair and smiled at her guests. I watched her hands, steady and confident, the same hands that once tore up my father's papers during an argument. I remembered the sound of ripping documents and my father's face turning pale. That was the night everything fell apart. That memory never left me. I'd been just a teenager, hiding behind the door, too scared to speak. Now those same papers, or copies of them, were sitting in my bag. I finally had what I needed to finish what he couldn't. I kept my focus on the tablecloth, tracing the patterns with my fingers. Each second I stayed quiet, gave her the illusion she still had control, let her think that. My silence was different now. It wasn't fear. It was strategy. I studied her. Every detail of her body language, the confident posture, the fake charm, the constant glances toward anyone who might disagree with her. She needed approval like air. I'd seen it for years but never used it against her. Tonight I planned to let her choke on her own performance. She started a new story about how she saved the company when my father got sick. I knew it was a lie, but everyone around her nodded like it was gospel. My father had told me once that trust can be the most dangerous weapon in the wrong hands. He was right. The documents I carried proved that she had drained his accounts long before the company went bankrupt. She blamed others for everything, painting herself as the hero. Watching her brag about it now almost made me laugh. The woman couldn't see her ending coming. I took a sip of water, keeping my eyes on her. She must have noticed something in my face because she shifted slightly, that practiced poise flickering for a moment. It was small, but I saw it. That's when I knew she sensed danger, even if she didn't understand where it was coming from. The funny part was, she'd taught me how to fake calmness. I learned it from watching her lie to people's faces. That same skill was now my shield. I smiled faintly, and she looked away, pretending not to care. My half-sister whispered something to her boyfriend, giggling. The stepmother shot her a warning look to behave. Control was everything to her, even over her grown children. I wondered if they'd ever see her the way I did. They grew up in the shadow of her charm, not her cruelty. I had seen both. My father used to say she had two faces, one for the world and one for home. I was always on the receiving end of the latter, but today I was ready to turn that mirror around. She began serving dessert, and skipped me entirely. Her hand hovered over my plate, then moved past it like I didn't exist. It was so deliberate, it almost made me laugh. No one said anything, though I saw a few uneasy glances from across the table. That old heat crept up inside me, the same helplessness I used to feel when she ignored me as a teenager. But this time, it didn't sting the same way. I wasn't that girl anymore. I reached for my bag under the table, feeling the corner of the envelope brush my hand. She started talking about my life, how it must be hard, living alone, and managing with an average job. It was disguised as concern, but the venom underneath was sharp. I smiled politely, letting her think she'd landed another blow. That always made her careless, and careless was when she slipped. I looked around the table. Some of the guests avoided my gaze. Others watched her like she was a performer. They couldn't interrupt. Every person here had been trained to stay quiet, just like me once. Tonight, one of us was breaking that rule. My father's photo caught my eye again. He looked so peaceful there, frozen in time. He had always believed that truth would eventually surface. It took longer than he imagined, but he wasn't wrong. I remembered the night I found his old files tucked away in a forgotten folder on his computer. That discovery started everything. It took months of tracing bank records and hidden accounts, but I finally had proof. This dinner wasn't just revenge, it was closure. I just needed the right moment to end her little show, once and for all. She raised her glass again, thanking everyone for coming. Her voice dripped with false sincerity, but her eyes met mine like she wanted to remind me where I stood. Then she smirked and said it, loud enough for everyone to hear, that the chairs were for important people and that I could sit on the floor. A few nervous chuckles followed. I didn't move right away. Instead, I pushed my chair back quietly and stood. The sound cut through the laughter. Every head turned as I leaned down, picked up my bag, and prepared to change everything. As I stood, her smirk widened, confident that I'd obey. For years, she fed off these small victories. She didn't realize that this time, I wasn't surrendering. I reached down and picked up my bag, feeling the envelope inside. I didn't pull it out yet, but its presence steadied me. She wanted me on the floor, humiliated like I used to be. That moment, I remembered my father's quiet warning before his stroke, his eyes filled with regret. He had known what she was capable of, and now I carried the proof he never got to reveal. My brother laughed nervously, asking her if she was serious. She brushed him off, saying she was only joking, but her tone told a different story. I felt the eyes around the table shift toward me. My aunt looked away, pretending to adjust her napkin. No one wanted to get involved. They never did. I bent down slightly, as if considering sitting on the floor, then stopped halfway. She didn't expect hesitation. I lifted my head and looked her straight in the eye. For once, I didn't care what anyone thought. I was done playing her game. The silence that followed was heavy with curiosity. My stepmother raised an eyebrow, trying to read me. I knew that look. It meant she was losing control. I straightened my back and calmly walked to the sideboard where the framed family photos were displayed. Most of them were her curated memories, vacations, celebrations, smiles without meaning. Only one photo included my father and me, small and tucked behind another frame. I pulled it forward and set it upright. Her lips tightened. She hated reminders of anything she couldn't rewrite. That tiny act was my first victory tonight. She laughed again, pretending to be unbothered. She called out something about me being dramatic, as always. I didn't answer. I went back to my chair and sat down, not on the floor, not where she told me to, but on the seat she'd tried to take from me. The room went quiet. My hand brushed against the envelope inside my bag, and I felt calm. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. Her stories, her control, her lies, all of it was about to unravel. one truth at a time, right here at her perfect table. Her attention shifted, but her irritation showed. She began talking to the guests again, pretending I wasn't there. Her laughter was too loud, too forced. I could see the cracks forming beneath her performance. I looked down at the gold watch on my brother's wrist again. My father's initials were still engraved on the side, proof that it was real. That watch had vanished the night my father collapsed in his study. I remembered the argument before that, his voice pleading for her to stop. I wondered if anyone else in this room remembered that night at all. I caught my brother's eye. He smiled weakly, not understanding why I was staring. He was young when it happened, too young to know what was stolen from him. Maybe that's why she'd always kept him close to protect her secrets. I wondered if he'd ever seen those bank statements, the ones hidden under her name and the name of her business partner. I had. It had taken years to trace them, but every number, every date matched the timeline of my father's downfall. I took a slow breath, knowing what was inside my bag would change everything. She called for attention again, raising her glass for a toast. She thanked everyone for their love and loyalty through the years. Her words were sugar over poison. Every syllable felt rehearsed, crafted for pity. She wanted the room to see her as the devoted widow who had carried her husband's legacy alone. I watched the reflection of the chandelier glint off the wine in her glass. That image, so perfect and fake, summed her up completely. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I placed my bag on the table and unzipped it just enough to touch the envelope inside. The table chatter faded as she looked at me, sensing something. She asked if I had something to say, her voice half mocking. I told her I did, but I'd wait until she was done. That startled her. She was used to interruptions, not patience. She smiled thinly, gesturing for me to continue her toast. The guests looked between us, caught in the middle of something they couldn't name. I folded my hands together, feeling my pulse steady. Every second of her smug silence was borrowed time now, and she didn't even know it. I almost felt sorry for her. She raised her glass again, but her words faltered this time. The pause hung in the air too long, breaking her rhythm. I could see the confusion in her eyes. She wasn't used to being unsure. I remembered my father's voice telling me to choose your moment carefully. This was it. I let her finish her toast, and when she sat down, I leaned forward slightly, calm and steady. I told her I'd brought something that belonged to her, or at least something that would remind her of what she'd done. The room went still. No one breathed. Her hand froze on her napkin. She tilted her head and asked what I meant, still pretending to be polite. I didn't answer right away. I reached into the bag and pulled out the envelope, setting it gently on the table in front of me. Everyone's eyes followed it. The paper was slightly worn from how many times I'd handled it, each crease a mark of hesitation and courage. My stepmother's smile faded. She recognized it. The same stationery my father used for his private correspondence. Her eyes flicked up to me, and I saw the fear begin. She laughed again, softer this time, asking why I'd brought old papers to dinner. The guest chuckled nervously, waiting for the joke to make sense. I didn't join them. I told her I thought it was time the family saw what my father was working on before he died. The smile on her face cracked. She called me foolish, said there was nothing worth discussing, but her voice betrayed her. The calm, commanding tone was gone. She leaned forward slightly, as if ready to snatch the envelope, but I kept my hand over it. Her mask was slipping. My brother frowned, confused. He asked what was in the envelope. I told him it was proof that Dad hadn't lost everything by accident. The words landed like stones on the table. My stepmother stiffened, gripping her glass tightly. The wine rippled from the pressure of her hand. She tried to interrupt, but I continued, explaining that my father had been preparing to expose someone before his stroke. The someone was sitting right in front of us. I didn't have to name her. Everyone understood. Her expression turned cold, her eyes darting toward the papers like a trapped animal. She told everyone not to listen, said grief had made me delusional. That word, delusional, echoed in my mind. She'd used it before, back when I was a teenager who questioned her lies. I let her talk, letting her dig deeper into panic. I slid the envelope closer to the center of the table. She reached out instinctively, but I stopped her hand with mine. That single gesture silenced her. I said I had copies stored elsewhere, so destroying this wouldn't help her. Her hand trembled slightly, and she withdrew it. Around us, whispers began to ripple through the guests. Her brother-in-law cleared his throat, asking if this was really necessary. My stepmother glared at him. She hated being questioned. I told him yes, it was necessary, because truth doesn't stay buried forever. She tried to laugh it off again, but her laughter cracked mid-sentence. The sound didn't match her face anymore. I opened the envelope slowly, letting the sound of the tearing paper echo across the table. Inside were neatly folded documents, copies of bank transfers, and one signed letter. I laid them out like cards in a game she never expected to lose. The letterhead bore my father's signature in handwriting. It outlined discrepancies he'd found in his own accounts. Funds moved without authorization. My stepmother leaned forward, eyes darting over the lines. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She recognized every number. She knew what this meant. I told everyone these were dated 2 weeks before his stroke. The shock spread across the table. No one spoke. For the first time in my life, she couldn't find words to control the room. The truth had finally arrived, and she had nowhere left to hide from it. Before I share what happened next, if you're still watching this story, make sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It helps me keep sharing stories like this. Her voice turned sharp, accusing me of invasion of privacy. I reminded her the documents were my father's, not hers. She shot back that I had no right to dig into things that didn't concern me. I smiled faintly and told her everything concerning my father concerned me. That silence hit the table like a weight. She turned to the guests for support, but no one defended her. The same people she'd controlled for years now avoided her gaze. I realized the power she had wasn't real. It was built entirely on other people's fear. She stood up suddenly, saying she wouldn't sit here and be accused of theft. I didn't stop her. I simply told her to look at the second page. Her hand hesitated before she flipped it. The list of transactions stared back at her. Every line was dated. Every amount linked to a name she recognized. Her old business partner, the one who vanished after Dad's death. She froze. Someone at the table whispered the name quietly, remembering the scandal years ago. Her voice cracked as she told everyone it was all coincidence, but even she didn't sound convinced anymore. I told them how I had traced the payments, connecting them to accounts under her maiden name. The table reacted quietly, a few people whispering in disbelief. My brother's fork slipped from his hand, clattering onto the plate. I told him gently that I didn't blame him. He was a victim too, just like Dad. My stepmother slammed her palm against the table, demanding that I stop, but her voice shook, and that tremor betrayed everything. I stayed seated, calm and deliberate, while she stood trembling in her own dining room for the first time. Her confidence began to collapse in front of everyone. She said I was twisting things, making her look bad. I told her I didn't have to twist anything. The papers spoke for themselves. She called me ungrateful, said she'd raised me when no one else wanted to. I reminded her that raising someone doesn't mean owning them. That line hit her harder than I expected. The guests stared at her, some in disbelief, some in silent satisfaction. For years they'd watched her rule this family with manipulation. Now they saw the cracks for themselves. Her brother-in-law stood up, asking if the documents were real. I said they were verified by my lawyer. I had copies in multiple places, so there was no point in trying to destroy them. My stepmother looked like she wanted to speak, but couldn't form the words. The room felt like it had flipped. She was no longer the center. The silence she'd used as control now worked against her. I leaned back in my chair, for once in command of my own story. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was loud enough. My aunt reached for one of the pages, scanning the numbers. Her expression changed from confusion to quiet recognition. She remembered something, an argument years ago about missing funds. She turned toward my stepmother, asking softly if it was true. My stepmother snapped at her, telling her to stay out of it. That reaction was all the answer anyone needed. The murmurs grew louder. For someone who built her reputation on composure, she looked shaken beyond repair. I didn't move, didn't gloat. I just watched as her carefully built world began to crack around her. My brother stood slowly, looking at the papers, then at our stepmother. His face was pale, his voice unsure. He asked her if she took Dad's money. She didn't answer. She looked down at the tablecloth, avoiding his eyes. He asked again, louder this time, and she still said nothing. That silence told everyone the truth. My brother sank back into his chair, stunned. The room that once belonged entirely to her no longer did. Every eye was on me now, not out of pity, but respect. I had finally broken through years of her control. She muttered something about people turning against her, calling me a liar again. But the anger in her voice sounded desperate, not confident. I reminded her that Dad's watch was sitting right there on my brother's wrist. She turned toward him sharply, realizing the mistake she'd made by letting him wear it. I told her it disappeared the same night the company went under. The timing wasn't coincidence. She opened her mouth to argue, but her face said otherwise. For years she used that watch as a reminder of her victory. Now it exposed her instead. The room was so still you could hear the faint ticking of the gold watch. I looked at her, the woman who'd built her power on deception, and saw fear for the first time. She lowered her gaze, realizing everyone was watching. I told her I wasn't here to humiliate her. I was here to finish what my father started. Her eyes flicked up, full of disbelief. She asked what I meant, but I didn't answer. I just reached into my bag again and pulled out one more document, the one that would finally end her lies. The paper in my hand wasn't a bank record or an account statement. It was a letter. My father had written it just days before his stroke. The handwriting was shaky, but clear. It mentioned a betrayal within the family and warned that someone close was stealing from him. He never named her outright, but it didn't take much to understand. I read the first few lines aloud, and the color drained from her face. She recognized every word. That letter had gone missing from his desk the night before he collapsed. Now it was right in front of her. She pushed her chair back, mumbling that the letter was fake. I said nothing, only showed her the photo of the original copy from my father's computer files. The same handwriting, the same date, the same phrasing. Her eyes flicked toward my brother again, as if hoping he'd come to her defense. But he didn't. He stared at the table, lost in thought. The truth was too clear to deny now. I felt something shift inside me, not satisfaction, but release. I had carried this for years, waiting for this moment, and now the weight was lifting. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Someone asked quietly if the police ever looked into my father's death. I told them they hadn't. She made sure of that. She'd convinced everyone it was a natural event, a stress-induced collapse. But my father had no prior health issues. The timing was too perfect. She called the whole idea ridiculous. Her laughter sounded strained, forced through clenched teeth. I didn't accuse her directly. I didn't need to. The room already understood. Sometimes the truth didn't need shouting. It just needed air. For the first time, she looked smaller than her voice. My stepmother's sister spoke up, asking what I wanted. I told her I wanted peace, not revenge. But peace needed truth first. My stepmother rolled her eyes, saying I was obsessed with the past. I told her she was wrong. It was her lies that kept me there. She slammed her napkin on the table, pretending to laugh it off, but the tremor in her hand betrayed her. She had spent years rehearsing this version of herself, the calm widow, the survivor. But now, that act was falling apart, and everyone at the table was finally seeing it happen. Her voice grew sharper, accusing me of trying to destroy what's left of this family. I reminded her that she destroyed it herself when she took everything that wasn't hers. She shouted that I had no proof of theft, just assumptions. I gestured toward the papers and asked her to explain the missing funds. Her face twisted, caught between pride and fear. She said those were business decisions. I asked which business, hers or my father's. The words hung in the air. No one interrupted. The truth didn't need my anger anymore. It was loud enough on its own. My brother stood again, his hands shaking slightly. He asked her if it was true. Her answer came too fast, too defensive. He looked at her like he didn't recognize her anymore. He said Dad always trusted her more than anyone. Her silence told him everything. The room felt heavier now, filled with quiet realization. I could see it in everyone's faces. The stories she'd told for years were finally unraveling. She had built her world on deception, and it was crumbling piece by piece right in front of her children. She was losing everything she controlled most belief. She pointed at me, saying, I was doing this for money. I told her I didn't want a single cent from her. That threw her off. She needed me to be greedy so she could paint me as the villain. I told her this was about my father's name, not the inheritance. Her expression shifted to confusion, like she couldn't process a motive that wasn't self-serving. The truth was, she only understood power and profit. The idea that someone would expose her just for peace didn't make sense to her. That made her more frightened than anything else. Her wine glass tipped as she reached for her purse, and red wine spilled across the tablecloth. The stains spread fast, soaking into the fabric, dark and wide. I couldn't help noticing how it looked like a mark she couldn't clean off, no matter how hard she tried. She grabbed a napkin, dabbing at it frantically, muttering that it was nothing. Everyone watched her panic grow over something so small, but it wasn't the wine that bothered her. She was unraveling, and the performance she'd lived by for decades was coming apart thread by thread. I stayed seated, watching quietly. For years, she had humiliated me in front of these same people. Now her own actions were doing it for me. There was no satisfaction in it, just quiet justice. She tried to compose herself again, pretending she was fine. She asked if we could end the discussion. I told her it wasn't over yet. There was one more thing. My words made her freeze. I reached back into the envelope and took out a smaller piece of paper folded in thirds. I placed it next to the spilled wine. Her eyes followed every movement. This paper wasn't an account or a letter. It was a receipt, a transfer of funds from one of my father's private accounts to a name she'd used under her maiden signature. She had forgotten about it. I told her I found it while sorting through his old filing cabinet. Her breathing changed. Her face looked pale. The guests leaned closer. The room had gone completely quiet, except for the faint sound of rain outside the window. It was the first time in my life that she looked powerless, like a mask slipping from someone who no longer knew who they were. She said the document was forged, that I made it up. I told her my lawyer verified the seal and the signature. She had no response. Her fingers tapped against the table, restless and unsure. The guests started whispering again, and her attempt to glare them into silence didn't work this time. She had lost control of the room entirely. For the first time, I saw her look genuinely scared. Not angry, not manipulative, scared. It was strange seeing her that way, like watching a queen realize her crown had turned into a weight she couldn't carry anymore. She stood up again, saying she wouldn't listen to nonsense. I told her she didn't have to. The papers spoke for themselves. She told everyone I was lying, but no one believed her anymore. I looked at her calmly, knowing there was nothing left to prove. The truth was right there, and everyone saw it. That silence around her wasn't protection, it was judgment. She was finally alone, without allies, without control, and as she stood there trembling, I realized something powerful. I didn't hate her anymore. I just didn't fear her. That difference meant everything to me. My brother pushed his chair back and said he needed air. My stepmother tried to stop him, but he brushed her off and walked out. Her hand hung in midair, helpless. I'd never seen her look at him that way before, like she realized she'd lost him too. She sat back down, her posture shrinking. I quietly gathered the papers into a stack, careful not to smudge the ink. She watched every motion, speechless. The same woman who'd once commanded every word in this house now couldn't form a sentence. Her silence was the only honest thing she had left. One of the guests, a family friend, asked softly what I planned to do next. I told them I wasn't sure. Maybe I'd take this to the authorities. Maybe I'd just let it rest. I wasn't after headlines or punishment. I just wanted truth to live somewhere visible, so it couldn't be erased again. My stepmother muttered that I was ruining the family's reputation. I told her she ruined it the day she put greed above love. Her head snapped up, eyes full of anger, but her mouth stayed shut. She had no words left that could save her. I stood up slowly, tucking the papers back into the envelope. My chair scraped against the floor, loud in the silence. She flinched at the sound, as if it marked the end of something she'd never get back. I told her I'd kept copies safe elsewhere, just in case. that made her blink fast, her mind calculating damage she couldn't undo. I looked around the table one last time. Everyone's eyes were on her now, not with admiration, but quiet disappointment. The illusion she built had finally cracked open for everyone to see. There was no going back. She looked up, desperate, trying to find sympathy in the faces around her. None came. Every person there had some small wound from her manipulation. Years of comments, comparisons, lies. They weren't angry, just tired. The mask she'd worn had fooled them too, but now it was gone. She said she had done everything for this family. I told her that was the problem. She did everything for the image of it, not the people in it. That line made her sink back in her seat, eyes glassy. The truth had finally found its way home, and it stung. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping softly on the window pane. It filled the silence better than words could. I stood by the window, watching the reflection of the table behind me. Her face looked older now, drained of the polish she always carried. The guests began gathering their things quietly, unsure what to say. I didn't stop them. Some truths didn't need closure. They just needed to be seen. My stepmother stayed seated, her fingers tracing the spilled wine like she was trying to erase it. But no matter how much she wiped, the stain stayed. I turned back to face her and told her I wasn't staying for dessert. Her mouth opened as if to protest, but she stopped herself. I grabbed my coat from the back of my chair. She looked at me, not with hatred anymore, but with something else. Fear mixed with recognition. Maybe for the first time, she saw me not as the quiet girl she could push around, but as someone who could stand on her own. That small shift felt like victory. I didn't need her approval anymore. I just needed to walk away. As I stepped toward the door, she spoke in a low voice, asking what I planned to do with the documents. I paused, but didn't turn around. I told her she'd find out soon enough. Her breath caught slightly, and I could feel her tension from across the room. I didn't mean it as a threat. It was just the truth. Actions would speak louder than anything she could spin. I walked toward the hallway, my shoes quiet on the polished floor she once made me scrub as a punishment for speaking out. This time, every step felt right. In the hallway, I passed the family portraits she'd hung to rewrite history. My father's image was smaller, framed in dull silver at the edge of a wall filled with her own. I stopped for a moment, staring at his face. I whispered a quiet promise that his name would be cleared. The sound of a chair scraping echoed faintly from the dining room, but I didn't look back. I'd given her enough of my life already. The rain outside was louder now, but it didn't bother me. For the first time, I didn't feel trapped by this house. I stepped outside onto the porch. The air was cool, the sky a dull gray. The wet ground reflected the lights from inside, creating warped versions of the life I was leaving behind. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes for a moment. My car sat where I left it, waiting like a promise of peace. I could still hear muffled voices through the door, her trying to explain, the guests pretending to care. It didn't matter anymore. The story wasn't hers to tell now, it was mine, and I wasn't going to hide it anymore. As I reached for my car door, I saw movement in the window. My stepmother stood there watching me. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. For once, she looked like someone realizing that power doesn't last forever. I didn't wave or nod. I just looked back long enough to let her see that I wasn't afraid. That was the only message she needed. I opened the car door and sat down. The envelope lay on the passenger seat again, dry and untouched. The truth felt heavier than before, but in a good way, it finally belonged to me. I rested my hand on the envelope, remembering every night I'd spent wondering if this moment would ever come. It had taken years of digging, doubt, and fear to get here. But now, sitting in my car, I realized it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about letting go. I didn't need her to confess. I didn't need the world to hate her. The truth existing was enough. My father's memory was safe now, untangled from her lies. I turned the key in the ignition, listening to the hum of the engine, soft and steady, like closure in motion. As I started to drive, the rain blurred the world outside the windshield. The glow of the house faded in the distance, replaced by streetlights reflecting on wet pavement. I thought about everything she'd said over the years, how I'd never be anything without her, how I was weak, how I should be grateful for her. I smiled faintly. Every word had been wrong. I was still standing, stronger than she'd ever wanted me to be. The rain didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like something washing me clean, leaving only truth behind. I didn't look back again. The city lights came into view, soft and distant through the rain. I felt strangely calm. The truth was out, and even if nothing came of it, the silence that once protected her was broken. That was enough. I reached over and placed the envelope inside the glove compartment. I'd decide what to do with it later. For now, I just wanted to breathe. My father used to tell me that freedom doesn't come from winning, it comes from not being afraid to lose. I finally understood what he meant. I drove on, feeling lighter with every mile. The next morning, I woke up early. My phone was filled with unread messages, most of them from relatives who'd been at the dinner. Some were shocked, others apologized for staying quiet. All those years. I didn't reply. I made coffee instead, letting the sound of it brewing fill the silence. For the first time, I felt no rush, no guilt, no obligation to explain myself. The truth was out now, living its own life beyond me. My stepmother's control had finally ended, and I didn't need to watch her fall to know that she had. I looked at the rain-soaked window, the sky still gray from last night. My reflection looked different, not older, just freer. I had spent so much of my life reacting to her, fighting invisible battles for approval that never came. But the moment I stopped needing it, everything shifted. I took a deep breath and opened the envelope again. The papers looked less threatening now, just evidence of a story that had finally reached its last page. I folded them neatly, placing them back inside. I wasn't afraid of what they meant anymore. I owned this truth completely. Around noon, I got a call from my brother. His voice was quiet, uncertain. He said Mom hadn't come out of her room all morning. He sounded more lost than angry. I told him I understood. None of this was easy to process. He asked if what I said was true. If Dad really knew, I told him yes, and that Dad tried to protect him, even when things got bad. My brother didn't speak for a few seconds. Then he said he wished he'd known sooner. I told him knowing now was enough. The silence that followed felt sincere. After hanging up, I walked outside with my coffee. The air smelled like wet soil and distant smoke. I stood there for a while, just listening to the quiet world around me. The chaos from last night felt far away, like it belonged to another life. I thought about how fear had ruled me for years. Fear of losing family, fear of being wrong, fear of speaking truth. But fear loses its power once you face it. I wasn't afraid anymore. That realization didn't make me proud, just peaceful. I finally felt like my father's daughter again. My phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't my brother. It was a message from my stepmother. Just one line, "We need to talk." I stared at it for a while before putting the phone face down. She still wanted control, even after everything. She wasn't ready to accept what she'd done. I decided not to answer. At least, not yet. Sometimes, silence says more than confrontation. I walked back inside, made another cup of coffee, and sat by the window. The storm had passed, and the world looked new again, washed clean of last night's noise. Later that day, I opened the small storage box I kept in my closet. Inside were old photos, letters, and keepsakes from my father. There was one thing I hadn't looked at in years, a small broken locket that held some of his ashes. The hinge was cracked, and it never stayed closed properly. I held it gently, feeling the cool metal against my skin. My father always believed that truth, no matter how painful, had to come out. I smiled faintly. It took time, but I'd done what he couldn't. That was the closure he always wanted for us. I spent the rest of the day sorting through old boxes, deciding what to keep and what to let go. It felt strange, freeing even, to handle those memories without sadness. Each photograph, each letter reminded me of how much life had changed. I found an old bus ticket folded inside a book, a trip I never took years ago when I'd planned to leave home. I smiled at it. Maybe I wasn't ready to run back then. Maybe I needed to stay, learn and confront things before moving on. Now I finally felt ready to go wherever I wanted. In the evening, my brother called again. He said he confronted her. She didn't deny it anymore. Instead, she cried, saying she'd done it for him, for the family. He told me she looked smaller somehow, fragile. I didn't say anything. He asked what he should do. I told him to live honestly. That was the only way to make things right now. I heard his voice break as he said he wished Dad were here. I did too, but I told him in a way, Dad still was. His truth was the reason we were finally free. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because I was restless, but because my mind kept revisiting moments from my childhood, quiet dinners, long silences, my father's tired eyes. I remembered the first time I caught her lying about money, how she convinced me it was a misunderstanding. I believed her because I wanted peace, but peace built on lies doesn't last. Lying there in the dark, I realized how much pretending had cost all of us. The house, the company, our family, it all fell apart because truth was treated like an enemy. I promised myself never again. I woke up early the next morning and decided to drive to my father's old office. It had been closed for years, but I still had the key. I found it wrapped in a faded ribbon, tucked inside a drawer. The moment I held it, something inside me steadied. That key wasn't just metal. It was a connection to everything he built, everything she tried to erase. I grabbed my coat, locked the door behind me, and drove through quiet streets lined with trees. The sun was barely up, casting a dull golden glow on the wet roads. When I arrived, the building looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was peeling, the windows dusty, but the sign with his name still hung above the door. I unlocked it and stepped inside. The smell of old paper and wood filled the air. Dust motes floated in the light, filtering through the blinds. Everything was frozen in time. The desk, the chair, even the cup that still sat where he left it. I walked around slowly, running my fingers over his books, his old notes, his handwriting. It felt like stepping into a paused memory that finally resumed. I sat at his desk, placing the envelope in front of me. For years, that desk represented something I couldn't touch. His world, his strength, his silence. Now I was sitting where he once did, seeing what he saw. I imagined him here on the night everything went wrong, pen in hand, trying to save what he could. I wished he could see that his truth had survived, even without him. I opened the envelope one last time and laid the documents out neatly across his desk, like returning pieces of a puzzle to their rightful place. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the old curtains. I closed my eyes and listened. It almost felt like the building itself was breathing again after years of holding its breath. I found a small framed picture of me and him on a shelf, taken when I was little. He looked proud, peaceful. I wiped off the dust and set it beside the papers. That photo was the last thing that made this office feel alive again. I whispered quietly, telling him everything was settled now. The words came easy, like something I'd needed to say for years. I stayed there for hours, reading through old files and letters. Most of them were routine business records, but some carried small personal notes he'd scribbled in the margins. Words like hope, future, and trust. I traced them with my finger. Those were the things she stole from him. The belief that good people could still win. Sitting there, I realized I could restore that. Not by erasing her, but by remembering him properly. The world had only heard her version for years. Now his voice would be heard again, through mine. That was my real inheritance. As the afternoon light faded, I locked the documents in his drawer. It felt symbolic, like closing a circle. I didn't need to take them with me anymore. They belonged here, in the place where truth was first buried and now uncovered. I took the broken locket from my neck and placed it beside the photo. For a moment, I just looked at it all together. The photo, the key, the envelope. It felt complete. I whispered a soft goodbye, though it didn't feel like leaving. It felt like setting something free that had been trapped for too long. I stepped outside and locked the door behind me. The wind was cooler now, carrying the smell of rain from the distance. I looked back at the building one more time. It didn't look sad or forgotten anymore. It looked peaceful, like the truth inside it had finally stopped fighting to be heard. I smiled faintly, brushing my hands together, as if letting go of invisible dust. The sun was setting, and the light painted everything in soft gold. I knew I'd never come back here again, and that thought didn't hurt. It felt right. Driving back, I passed familiar streets that no longer made me feel small. Every corner used to remind me of her control, but now it felt like I'd reclaimed them. The bakery, the park, the corner store. They were just places again, not memories tied to pain. I rolled down the window, letting the wind rush in. It was cold, but it made me feel alive. I realized healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering differently. The world looked the same, but I was different now, and that made all the difference. When I got home, I saw an envelope under my door. It was from my brother. Inside was a short note. He said he planned to move out, to start somewhere new. He thanked me for showing him the truth and said he'd take care of Mom until she faced what she'd done. His words were steady but kind. I smiled reading it. Maybe this mess could still end in something good. Maybe honesty could rebuild what lies destroyed. I folded the note carefully and placed it beside my father's old photograph on my desk. It felt fitting. I sat down and turned on a small lamp, the warm light filling the room. For years, I had lived waiting for some kind of apology or acknowledgement that never came, but I didn't need it anymore. My closure didn't depend on her regret. It came from my own courage. I had finally broken the cycle of silence that ruled my life. That realization brought a strange calm I hadn't felt in years. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet fill the space. For once, quiet didn't mean fear. It meant peace. As night deepened, I found myself staring at the ceiling, thinking about the strange path that led me here. Every humiliation, every cruel word, every moment I stayed silent had brought me to this point. Pain had its own kind of wisdom. It taught me patience, taught me to see through false kindness, taught me that truth matters more than comfort. My father used to say that real strength isn't loud, it's steady. I understood that now. The strength I had wasn't from anger or revenge. It came from not needing her approval ever again. I decided to call it a night. As I turned off the lights, I caught my reflection in the window again. I didn't look like the scared girl she used to belittle. I looked like someone who had walked through fire and made it out whole. I smiled faintly and whispered goodnight to the darkness. The rain began again outside, light and steady. I listened to it as I lay down, the sound blending with my breathing. Sleep came easily this time, not as an escape, but as rest earned through truth, the kind my father always believed in. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains. It felt like a new beginning, simple and unforced. I made breakfast, not thinking about the past, or what might come next. I had no plans, and that was fine. The world didn't owe me anything, but I didn't owe it silence either. I stepped outside with my coffee and watched the neighborhood wake up. Everything looked ordinary, but somehow, that felt extraordinary. I realized I didn't need revenge or victory. All I needed was this quiet morning, free from her voice in my head. My phone buzzed again, another message from my stepmother. This time, she didn't demand or accuse. She just wrote, "I don't know who I am anymore." I stared at the words for a long moment. For the first time, they sounded honest. I typed a reply but deleted it before sending. Some things didn't need answers. I hoped, in some way, she'd face her truth too. Not for me, but for herself. Everyone deserves the chance to rebuild, even if they don't deserve forgiveness. That thought felt strange, but right. Maybe that was what growth really looked like. As the day went on, I found myself humming softly, something my father used to do while working. The memory made me smile. I decided to take a walk through the park nearby. The trees were bare, and the air was cool, but it felt good to move. I passed people talking, children playing, strangers living their own quiet stories. I thought about how life keeps going, no matter how broken things seem. That thought didn't make me sad anymore. It made me grateful. The truth had hurt, yes, but it had also set everything right again. I sat on a park bench and watched the sunlight flicker through the branches. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe without the weight of the past pressing on me. My father's words echoed in my mind. "Don't let anyone decide your worth." I smiled softly. He'd been right all along. My worth wasn't hers to take. It never was. I looked up at the open sky, feeling lighter than I had in years. The truth hadn't destroyed me. It rebuilt me, piece by piece, into someone unshakably whole. A few days later, I decided to visit my father's grave. The drive there felt quiet, almost sacred. I hadn't been back since the funeral, because my stepmother made those visits unbearable. She'd turn every moment into a performance about her loss. This time, it was just me, the road, and the truth that had finally come out. I stopped by a small flower shop on the way and bought a simple bouquet. No roses, no extravagance, just the kind of wildflowers he always liked. He used to say they reminded him of simple things done right. The cemetery was nearly empty when I arrived. The air was crisp, and birds moved quietly between the trees. I walked the familiar path, my shoes crunching against gravel, and stopped when I reached his name carved into the stone. It was cleaner than I expected. Someone had been maintaining it. Maybe my brother. I set the flowers down gently, brushing away a few leaves caught against the base. Standing there, I didn't feel grief the way I used to. I felt gratitude. He had trusted me, even when he couldn't tell me everything, and that trust had survived. I knelt down and spoke softly, not really expecting answers. I told him I'd found the truth, that everyone knew now, and that she couldn't hurt anyone anymore. Saying the words out loud made something inside me settle. For years I'd carried this feeling like unfinished business. Now it felt complete. The wind rustled through the trees as if acknowledging it. I smiled faintly. It wasn't dramatic, not emotional, just peaceful. I told him I forgave him for being silent back then. He did what he thought was right, and now I was finally doing the same. As I stood up, I noticed a small object near the edge of the gravestone. It was a watch. His gold watch. The same one that disappeared years ago. My breath caught for a second. Someone had placed it there recently. It gleamed, freshly polished. My brother must have done it. I picked it up, running my thumb over the engraving of his initials. The ticking was faint, but steady. It still worked. That sound felt like a heartbeat. Quiet, but alive. I placed it back down beside the flowers, exactly where it belonged. It finally found home again. I stayed there a while longer, lost in thought. So much had changed, yet everything felt familiar. The same sky, the same air, but I wasn't the same person who once stood here feeling powerless. I had faced her, not with rage, but with truth. That was the real victory. I whispered a quiet goodbye and stepped back. My father used to say that truth was like sunlight. It may burn, but it also heals. As I walked away, that phrase echoed in my mind. Maybe that was why the day felt so warm, even under a cloudy sky. Driving home, I felt lighter. The road stretched ahead, open and calm. I rolled the window down and let the wind move through my hair. Every turn brought a sense of release, like leaving behind an old weight that no longer belonged to me. I thought about the years I spent shrinking myself to fit her version of me. It was strange how lies can shape who you become if you let them. But truth has its own power. It rebuilds what fear destroys. I was beginning to see that my story didn't start with her. It started beyond her. That evening, my brother called again. His voice was clearer this time. Steadier, he said. Mom admitted to moving the money. She claimed she was desperate back then, that she thought she could fix it before Dad noticed. He didn't defend her, but I could hear the sadness in his tone. I told him it wasn't his burden to carry. Everyone has to face their own truth. He said he'd return the rest of Dad's things to me, including a box of old photos. I thanked him quietly. It wasn't just about things. It was about restoring what was lost. Later that night, I went through my own photo albums, flipping through old memories. There was one picture of me sitting on my father's lap at the dining table, smiling while he held a spoonful of cake. I remembered that day. It was my birthday, the one she ruined later by throwing the cake out. Seeing that photo reminded me of something important. No one could take away the love that existed before the lies. The past wasn't just pain. It held joy too, small and real, and I finally let myself remember it without bitterness. The next day, I got a call from a lawyer. He said he represented my father's estate and needed to confirm something. Apparently, My father had quietly updated his will before his stroke, leaving certain properties and accounts in my name. I was stunned. My stepmother never knew. The lawyer said the documents had only recently resurfaced during an audit. I thanked him and hung up, sitting in silence for a long time. My father had known, even when everything fell apart. He trusted me enough to protect me without my knowledge. That realization hit deep. I thought about what to do next. It wasn't about wealth, it was about legacy. My father's company, his life's work, had been buried under her name and her lies. Now I had the chance to bring his truth back to light. But part of me hesitated. Revenge wasn't what I wanted anymore. I wanted peace. I decided I'd reopen the office, not as his old business, but as something new, a community center, a place that helped people rebuild after betrayal or loss. It felt like the right way to turn his pain into something that healed others. The idea stayed with me for days. I began researching what it would take: permits, funding, restoration. It sounded impossible, but so did surviving everything I had. My father once told me, if something is right, the path won't be easy, but it will feel true. That thought stayed with me. I didn't want to live defined by what she'd taken from us. I wanted to create something good from what she'd tried to destroy. Maybe that was the truest revenge, building where she had only torn down. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like purpose. My brother offered to help. He said he wanted to be part of it, to make up for staying silent all those years. I told him he didn't owe me that. But he insisted. Maybe this was his way of healing too. We met the next morning at the office. The lock was old, the paint chipped, but when I turned the key, it opened easily. The smell of dust greeted us again. My brother stood beside me quietly. We didn't need words. We both knew this was the start of something new, something Dad would have been proud of. We spent hours cleaning that day, wiping away years of neglect. The walls were lined with framed certificates and faded blueprints. My brother found an old voice recorder on the shelf. It still had a single recording saved. We hesitated before playing it. My father's voice filled the room, tired but steady. He spoke about trust, about mistakes, about hope. It sounded like a message he never got to deliver. My brother looked at me, eyes glistening. I didn't cry. Instead, I smiled. It felt like my father was still guiding us, reminding us to keep going. We restored the sign above the door that still carried his name. It gleamed again under the sunlight, after years of dust. I told my brother we'd add a new plaque beneath it. When the time came, one that read "Built on Truth." He laughed softly, saying Dad would have liked that. As we worked, I realized something simple. Closure isn't about ending things. It's about continuing them differently. The past wasn't a wound anymore. It was a foundation. And from that foundation, we could build something stronger than before. The kind of legacy no lie could ever destroy. When evening came, we stood outside the office, tired but content. The light from inside spilled onto the street, warm and golden. My brother said he couldn't believe how alive the place felt again. I nodded, telling him that truth has a way of breathing life back into everything it touches. He smiled and hugged me, something he hadn't done since we were kids. It wasn't dramatic, just real. For the first time in years, our family felt like a family again, even if it was smaller now. Sometimes healing means accepting who's left and loving them harder. As we locked up, I noticed the faint reflection of the sign in the office window. My father's name glowed against the fading daylight. I took a picture on my phone, not to share online, but to keep for myself. It was proof that we'd finally restored what was stolen. My brother asked if I thought Mom would ever come around. I told him maybe, maybe not. People can change if they're brave enough to face their truth, but she'd have to do that on her own. I couldn't carry her burden anymore. I already had peace. That night, I got home and sat by the window again. The city lights shimmered outside, and I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. The envelope still sat on my desk, but I didn't open it. It wasn't a weapon anymore. It was history. My father's photo beside it seemed to smile back at me under the lamp's glow. I whispered softly that we were okay now. The words felt final, like the closing of a long chapter. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need validation. The truth was enough, and that made me free. The following morning, I donated the duplicate copies of my father's documents to the lawyer, asking him to archive them officially. I didn't want them to vanish again. He agreed, saying my father would have been proud. I thanked him and walked outside. The sun was bright and the sky was clear. It felt symbolic, like the world itself had shifted from the gray clouds of the past. I stopped for a moment, letting the sunlight warm my face. Truth, I realized, doesn't just expose, it also heals. It gives you back pieces of yourself you thought were lost. A few weeks passed, and the community center idea began taking shape. I met with architects, volunteers, and even former employees who wanted to help. Word spread quickly, not about the scandal, but about rebuilding something meaningful. People respected that. I saw how truth could transform shame into purpose. Every meeting, every conversation reminded me that this story was bigger than revenge. It was about restoration. I no longer felt haunted by the past. I was using it to build something good, something that would outlast the pain. That realization filled me with quiet pride. One afternoon, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. It was from her, my stepmother. I hesitated before opening it. Inside, she didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply wrote that she was leaving town, that she couldn't face the people here anymore. She said she'd seen the photo of Dad's office restored, and that it made her realize how much she'd lost. Not money, but respect, love, and peace. I read it twice, unsure how to feel. There was no anger left in me, just a strange kind of understanding. I placed her letter beside the envelope on my desk. 2 stories, one of lies, one of truth, sitting side by side. I didn't know what would become of her, but that wasn't my concern anymore. I'd carried her shadow for too long. It was time to live without it. I lit a candle and let the quiet fill the room. My father's words came to mind again. The truth doesn't destroy, it sets free. He'd been right all along. I looked around my small apartment, realizing it finally felt like home, not a hiding place, just home. The next morning, I met my brother at the office again. He'd brought coffee and 2 muffins, saying we should start our new routine. We laughed at how normal it felt. Normal was something I hadn't experienced in years. We sat by the open door, sunlight spilling across the floor. He told me he'd found an old diary of Dad's tucked inside a drawer. It wasn't about business. It was about family. The last line read, "I hope she finds her voice someday." I didn't cry. I just smiled. I had found it, and I wasn't losing it again. As days turned into weeks, the office transformed. Fresh paint, repaired floors, new furniture. Each improvement felt like a small act of healing. People began visiting, offering donations, sharing stories of how my father had helped them years ago. Hearing those memories filled the space with warmth. It wasn't just an office anymore. It was alive again, full of purpose. I walked through the rooms one evening, watching the light fade through the windows. I felt his presence there, not as a ghost, but as a quiet strength. The kind that never leaves, just changes form. At night, I often found myself sitting by the old desk, staring at the photo I left there. Sometimes I talked to him softly, telling him how the day went. It became a ritual, not from sadness, but gratitude. He had trusted me with something bigger than I understood. I realized that truth doesn't always roar. It whispers, waiting for you to be ready to listen. I had finally listened, and it led me here, where the pain of the past had turned into the peace of purpose. That was something no lie could ever steal again. One morning, as the sun rose, I stood outside the office watching people walk in. Volunteers, workers, visitors. Life had returned to this place, and with it, so had hope. I thought about how everything started with that dinner, that moment she told me to sit on the floor. She wanted me beneath her, unseen. Now, I stood taller than I ever had, not above anyone, just fully myself. The truth had brought me here. My father's legacy wasn't money or power, it was courage. And that was something I finally had in full. That evening, after everyone had left, I stayed behind in the office. The light was dim, the air calm. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the desks, the memories that had survived time. It felt strange knowing this place once held so much pain and now carried peace. I sat at my father's old chair, the one I'd avoided for years, and closed my eyes. For a brief moment, I could almost hear him humming, the way he used to when deep in thought. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It felt alive again. I opened the drawer and found one last item, a folded paper tucked beneath old receipts. It was a note from my father, written in his neat handwriting. The words were simple. "For when you are ready." My throat tightened as I unfolded it. Inside, he had written, "The truth will always find you. Let it set you free." I smiled through the stillness. It felt like he had been waiting for me to discover this at the right time. I placed the note back in the drawer, feeling a calm I hadn't known since I was a child. Outside, the evening sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. I stood by the window, watching people pass by, unaware of the battles that once took place in this building. It amazed me how life moves forward, indifferent but steady. I realized that was the beauty of it. No matter how broken things become, the world keeps spinning, offering chances to rebuild. My stepmother had chosen lies. I had chosen truth. One destroys from fear. The other heals through courage. That difference defined everything. And I finally understood what side I belonged to. I locked up the office and walked toward my car. The sound of my footsteps echoed softly in the quiet street. I thought about my father's voice, my brother's forgiveness, and even her, my stepmother, sitting somewhere with her regrets. I didn't hate her anymore. Maybe that was the final step of healing, understanding that some people destroy others because they never learned how to build themselves. I had spent years trying to prove my worth to her, but now I knew I never had to. I was enough. I always had been. She just couldn't see it. At home, I made tea and sat by the window. The city lights shimmered below like scattered stars. For years, I avoided nights like this because they made me think too much. But tonight, thinking didn't hurt. I opened my journal and began to write, not about pain or betrayal, but about rebuilding. I wrote about truth, forgiveness, and the quiet strength it takes to stay kind after cruelty. Every word felt lighter than the one before it. I wasn't writing a confession anymore. I was writing a beginning, one that belonged entirely to me. Days turned into weeks, and the community center opened officially. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was small but meaningful. My brother stood beside me, and a few of my father's old friends attended. We hung his photo inside the entrance, with a plaque that read, "For those who rebuild." People came and went all day, families, children, strangers looking for help. Watching them filled me with gratitude. This was no longer a space defined by betrayal. It had become a place of renewal, living proof that truth could build something even stronger than lies ever could. My father's legacy had returned. That night, when everyone left, I turned off the lights and stood alone in the quiet hall. The air still carried traces of paint and coffee, but it smelled like life again. I walked to the photo of my father and whispered that we'd done it. There was no need for ceremony or applause. The satisfaction was quiet, personal. I realized then that I didn't need big endings. I just needed peace that stayed. That kind of peace doesn't shout. It settles inside you, and when it does, it feels like coming home after years away. The following morning, I received a text from my stepmother. She said she was moving overseas to live with relatives. She didn't ask for forgiveness, just said she hoped one day I'd understand her. I didn't reply. Not because I was bitter, but because there was nothing left to say. Understanding doesn't mean agreement. It just means acceptance that some people never change. I wished her well in my heart and put the phone aside. Carrying anger wouldn't undo anything. Letting go wasn't about her anymore. It was about me reclaiming the peace she'd once taken. That afternoon, I met my brother for lunch. He looked better, lighter somehow. We talked about simple things like movies, work, and plans for the future. No talk of the past, no mention of her, just life as it should have always been. He told me he'd started volunteering at the center in his free time. I smiled, proud of him. He said he felt closer to Dad there than anywhere else. I understood that feeling completely. The past hadn't broken us. It had reconnected us. That was the quiet miracle I hadn't expected, but deeply needed. Weeks later, the center held its first community event. The hall was filled with people, laughter, and the sound of kids running. I stood at the back, watching. The walls that once carried silence now echoed with joy. My father's picture hung above it all, his eyes calm and kind. For a brief moment, I imagined him there, smiling at what we'd built. I felt a lump in my throat, but didn't cry. This wasn't sadness, it was gratitude. I realized healing doesn't erase scars, it just makes them part of something beautiful, something true. After the event ended, I stayed behind to clean up. My brother turned off the lights, and we walked outside together. The night air was cool and gentle. He looked at me and said, "Dad would be proud." I didn't answer right away. I just nodded and smiled. Sometimes silence says more than words. As we locked the door, I looked back through the glass one last time. The reflection showed us standing side by side where lies once divided us. That image felt complete, like a story that had found its proper ending. A month later, I visited the office alone again. I brought new flowers for the desk, replacing the old ones. I sat in my father's chair, thinking about how strange life could be, how everything painful had led to something good. The pain had purpose now. It had carved space for truth to live. I realized that closure isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about no longer needing to change it. I didn't wish things had gone differently. If they had, I wouldn't be here, living this version of peace. And peace, I learned, is enough. Before leaving, I opened the drawer and looked at his final note again. The truth will always find you. I ran my fingers over the ink, still dark after all these years. He was right. It found me when I least expected it, and it set me free in ways I didn't understand until now. I placed the note beside the small photo of him, then locked the drawer. That truth didn't belong hidden anymore, but it also didn't need to be shown. It was part of me now, living quietly, exactly where it belonged. Outside, the streets were busy with people heading home. I stood there for a moment, watching them. Each person carried their own story, their own battles, their own truths waiting to be faced. It made me think of the concept of Sonder, that realization that everyone's life is as complex and vivid as your own. For years, I thought my pain was unique, but it wasn't. Everyone carries something invisible. That thought didn't make me sad. It made me feel connected. The world didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt shared, alive, full of untold stories crossing paths in silence. As I walked to my car, I passed the bench across the street where my father used to sit during his lunch breaks. It was worn and old now, but I smiled at the memory of him feeding birds there, always with that same calm look. I sat down for a minute, feeling the same wind he once did. It wasn't nostalgia, it was presence. He was still here in the quiet spaces, in the truth that outlived both pain and lies. That thought comforted me. Some things don't vanish. They simply change form and stay beside you. The sun dipped low, painting the buildings in soft orange light. I closed my eyes and let it touch my face. It felt warm, grounding. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for closure or searching for meaning. I was living it. The journey had been messy, painful, and long, but every step led me here to peace built on truth. My stepmother had power once, but it was borrowed, fragile, dependent on silence. Truth didn't need force. It just needed time, and time had done its work perfectly. The rest, I knew, would take care of itself. A few days later, I visited my father's grave again. The gold watch was still there, glinting softly in the sun. The flowers had wilted slightly, but they still held color. I replaced them with fresh ones, and stood there for a while, not saying much. I didn't need to. The silence said enough. I placed my hand on the stone, feeling its cool surface. I told him that the truth he fought for lived on, not through anger, but through kindness. He had taught me that even broken things can hold light, if you're willing to look closely enough. As I turned to leave, I noticed a small bird perched nearby. It tilted its head, chirped once, and flew off toward the horizon. It was such a simple thing, yet it made me smile. Life keeps moving, always forward, always renewing itself. That thought gave me comfort. I walked back to my car, not with the heaviness of loss, but with gratitude, the kind that sits quietly in your chest, and doesn't demand attention, it just is. The truth didn't take anything from me, it gave me back the parts I thought I'd lost forever. On the drive home, I passed the neighborhood where I grew up. The house was still there, though it looked smaller now, almost harmless. I slowed down for a moment, remembering all the times I walked those halls afraid to speak. I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't hate that house. It was just a place that held old lessons. I drove past it without stopping. Some doors aren't meant to be reopened. The past had taught me what it needed to. And that was enough. There was nothing left there that could define me anymore. Back home, I took the locket from my drawer. The hinge was still broken, but I didn't mind. I placed it on the windowsill, where the sunlight could hit it every morning. It didn't need fixing. It was beautiful in its imperfection, just like everything else that had survived. I realized healing isn't about mending what's broken, it's about finding beauty in the cracks. That was my father's final gift, even if he never said it out loud. The light caught the locket's edge, and for a brief moment, it gleamed brighter than gold. I sat down at my desk and began writing again. This time, I wasn't documenting pain. I was writing stories of resilience, of people who found strength after betrayal, just like I did. It felt natural, like the next step. Maybe others would see themselves in those stories and find courage too. My father believed that truth connects people. He was right. Every story, every struggle carried a piece of light meant to be shared. I smiled, knowing his lessons wouldn't end with me. They would live on through every word I wrote from here on. Time moved gently in the weeks that followed. The community center thrived. My brother laughed more, and I slept peacefully every night. I sometimes thought of her, wondering where she went, but not with bitterness, just curiosity. People like her fade quietly when truth takes root. Lies need constant feeding, truth lives on its own. I'd chosen the latter, and it had changed everything. I realized peace wasn't something you find, it's something you build, one honest choice at a time, and with each day that peace grew stronger, steady as the morning light. One evening, I walked to the park where I once sat alone after that first dinner confrontation. The same bench was there, the same path, but I was different now. I sat there quietly, watching the world move around me. Families laughed. Children played. Strangers smiled at one another. It was ordinary, but it felt extraordinary to me. I thought of my father, of everything we went through, and I smiled. The truth didn't just set me free, it brought me back to life. That realization filled me with a warmth that words couldn't describe. As the sky darkened, I stood and began walking home. The lights from the street reflected on the wet pavement. Soft and steady, every step felt like peace. I wasn't defined by pain, by her cruelty, or by the lies that once ruled my life. I was defined by what I chose to become after them. My father's voice echoed in memory, gentle and sure, "Truth will always find you." And it had. I looked up at the night sky, smiled, and whispered, "It found me." Then I walked forward, free at last, into the quiet promise of tomorrow.